Few number 1 overall picks have gotten as little attention as the Atlanta Hawks' Zaccharie Risacher. And it's not exactly a surprise, he wasn't exactly the most hyped player going into his draft class, and it was really unfortunate that he was stuck in between two of the greatest prospects ever in Victor Wembanyama and Cooper Flagg. But just because his pre-draft type and possibly even his ceiling aren't as high as somebody who would be usually drafted at the number 1 overall spot doesn't mean he didn't have a more than solid rookie season. In fact, Risacher actually turned around a pretty poor start to his career, and he finished second in Rookie of the Year voting while being on the all-rookie first team. Now, his stats last year don't exactly jump off the paper, especially not like how we've seen former number 1 overall picks. However, following the All-Star break, he was a different player. He did take a major leap from an efficiency standpoint. He became a better scorer, he defended better, and while he didn't look like a star, he certainly looked like he was a guy capable of making that leap into becoming a solid NBA player. To be a little bit more exact, following the All-Star break, Zaccharie Risacher was averaging about 3 more points, 1 more rebound, he shot 7% better from the field, and 9% better from 3 while increasing his volume. In the latter half of last season, he went from 32 to 41% from 3 while shooting 5 attempts per game. That is some serious volume. And we typically don't see a lot of foreign players shoot the 3 ball that well, given the fact that the EuroLeague does have different 3-point length compared to the NBA. And overall, even for a player's career, efficiency jumps like this aren't that common, and it might just be a sign of more things to come. Remember, Zaccharie Risacher had an awful start to his career. A shooting slump bogged down the majority of his pre-All-Star time, where he averaged just 11 points, 3 rebounds, and an assist. He wasn't the 3-and-D player that he was touted as, but after the All-Star break, everything changed. One reason in this change might have been a little bit of his shot selection, with Risacher averaging 1 more spot-up 3 following the All-Star break, but he didn't just increase his volume. Like I said, he increased his efficiency. Purely on those catch-and-shoot type of opportunities, Zaccharie Risacher actually became the same type of shooter as Gary Trent Jr. And in the latter half of last season, he was actually a better catch-and-shoot player than OG Anunoby, Buddy Hield, and Michael Porter Jr. For the entirety of last season, including his poor start, he was actually the same level catch-and-shoot player as Devin Booker. The second half of the season really showed the kind of player that he could be, and it really showed us the 3-and-D player that he was touted as when he was drafted at the number 1 overall spot. After all, fans were pretty nervous seeing a guy who was supposed to be a 3-and-D player shoot 32% from 3 while not even being a positive defender. And yes, statistically on the defensive side of the ball, Zaccharie Risacher still has a ton of stuff to improve. However, to me, he did also pass the eye test, especially as last year went on. For a forward, he emerged as a pretty solid rim protector. He wasn't afraid to challenge the ball at any angle. He also avoided fouling, which was pretty good, especially to see for a rookie. He is one of the more athletic forwards in the league, being around 6'8", 200 pounds. He does a good job staying in front of defenders, and his strength actually makes it hard for him to be moved, and he's just long enough with that 6'8" frame to contest shots. Outside of his frame, one thing specifically that I noticed is that he was incredible in closeouts. Now, for a rookie, I very rarely ever saw him overcommitting on a player. He did a good job shuffling his feet, putting a hand up, maybe closing down a passing lane, and just overall staying in front of a guy. It's not uncommon to see even veteran players not do a good job closing out or helping on a rotation, so the fact that Zaccharie Risacher was doing pretty well at that definitely gives me promise of the 3-and-D kind of player he can be. I know he wasn't touted as an amazing defender, and his energy on defense was definitely said to have been better, but from what I saw, his energy on defense and his just overall commitment to that side of the ball wasn't too bad. He showed effort in just about every single play, rarely taking any of them off, and with that, he was quite active in transition both on the offensive and defensive sides of the ball. There were quite a few times where I saw him chasing down a play where it seemed like the rest of the Atlanta Hawks had already given up on it. Or on opposite on the offensive side of things, where he would be leaking out before any guy on the opposing team was able to respond, and he got his team a free 2 points. Risacher showed great improvement over the season and as the year went on. And even though he was touted a lot as being that 3-and-D kind of player, I think the most impressive part of his game, or the most surprising part of his game, might have just been his ability to move without the ball and his off-ball cutting. Despite being a rookie, Zaccharie Risacher has been one of the better off-ball movers in the entire NBA. He does a great job in helping out his own 3-point ability by filling out corners, drifting to open spots, or on top of that, he has the ability to cut into the open area and convert. He's really good at finding somewhere where the defense isn't looking, hitting the open shot, or finding the perfect cut that maybe just opens up something for his teammate. And that makes sense. For the last season, he was actually in the 60th percentile, both in cutting and scoring in transition, which for in transition, that actually puts him on the same level as Amin Thompson. I think a large majority of this is definitely because Zaccharie Risacher benefits from playing with a high-level playmaker in Trae Young, but I've also kind of seen just in some of the games from last year where he was helping out Trae Young when he was double teamed, when the defense was collapsing on him. He was making himself visible to Young. That alone can help prevent turnovers and it can keep an offense moving. But off-ball movement means nothing if you can't convert at the rim, but that was something that I found that Risacher was actually doing pretty well, especially as the year went on. At his shots at the rim, he was making around 2 per game, shooting around 64-65%, a mark actually similar to that of Luka Doncic. This is definitely something he could be a bit better at, just because I do think Risacher has the tools to be a good finisher, good body control, he can hit some of those tough, more awkward shots, he's had good touch around the rim and paint area, and finishing well at the rim or developing like that short floater game, that little short hop game, that can be the difference between being a 3-and-D player or a more multi-level scorer that really can put defenses in a bind. In addition to this, I also noticed that he did show a little bit of promise in scoring out of the pick and roll or out of a handoff. Typically, once he got his momentum going towards the hoop, he would be a little bit harder to stop, albeit his playmaking out of these scenarios definitely needs to be better because he wasn't really averaging a lot of assists even as the year went on and even as he got a greater use in the offense. But I think for the most part, his finishing and his ability to get looks out of those scenarios, they weren't that bad. And while he's shown promise as a shooter, as a defender, and even a little bit as a finisher, he definitely still has some things that he needs to improve on, or there are some things that he just may never be able to get better at. I don't think he's a bad passer per se, but most of Risacher's assists are coming from handoffs or drive and kick scenarios with that occasional highlight. He averages the same amount of assists to turnovers. He also did this back in Europe as well, so there wasn't really a whole lot of improvement in that regard. This doesn't really concern me a whole lot just yet because he is still very young. It was his rookie season, he was just 19 years old, but I would also be willing to bet that on average, the average European prospect is probably a better passer than the average American prospect. And I definitely found that just because Risacher wasn't the greatest passer in the world didn't mean he was a selfish player, and that doesn't mean he wasn't playing a team style of ball. He just needs to get better for that team style of ball to convert to numbers. And Risacher's ability to pass, that was something called into question before he was even drafted. He was not touted to be a great playmaker. Like I said, he had an even assist to turnover ratio even back in Europe. However, I think he's shown some marks to be that of a possible good passer, average passer in the future. Don't know if he can be a consistent playmaker for a high-level team, but I do think he's going to be an okay passer. He won't be like a Michael Porter Jr. kind of guy. Defensively, he's shown some promise. However, his ratings and statistics didn't really back that up just yet. However, Atlanta as a whole, they're kind of going through a defensive change in themselves, and they've had one of the best defenses they've had in years, but Risacher's defensive tools are somewhat limited. Yes, he does have a good frame, being 6'8", 200 pounds, but his wingspan is also less than 7 feet. That is not exactly great by NBA standards. Also, on top of that, he wasn't exactly the most laterally quick guy in the world. He wasn't like that coming into the draft. So even though I think he has good like footwork and tangibles, you know, maybe like won't get beat by on like a closeout or like he can defend a guy down low, he isn't also laterally the quickest guy in the world either, which could give him some potential of being beat there. Also, just from a defensive IQ standpoint, any rookie needs to grow because, you know, you're not going to be the greatest off-ball defender in the world at 19, 20, 21 years old. One of the more concerning things with Zaccharie Risacher, and one thing that might prevent him from becoming a higher level player, is his lack of ability to make his own shots. That is really the difference between becoming a good role player versus a good starter versus becoming an above average to even all-star kind of player. Risacher, like I said, he wasn't a good playmaker. His dribbling, I think, was kind of suspect. He wasn't like the greatest in that regard. His isolation game was basically non-existent. He sat in like the 7th percentile of all players last year. And really the majority of his scoring last year, it either came off of a spot-up scenario, came off of an off-ball cut, or it came out of transition. So while he did show great potential in all those areas, if he wants to be able to be capable of being anything more, he definitely needs the ability to create his own shot, and he needs to be able to create a shot without having the benefit of a guy like Jalen Johnson or Trae Young. And then it seems like it's still just the key part of any player being a good 3-level scorer or isolation player, but having a mid-range game. I think he has the potential of being a great mid-range player, being 6'8" and being a good 3-point shooter, but he wasn't a good free throw shooter. That's usually indicative of a mid-range game, and his mid-range stats were pretty poor as well. While Risacher still does have some flaws in his game, I'm honestly not too concerned about them. I still think that Zaccharie Risacher was one of the more underrated players of last year, and I think the improvement that he did as the year went on is something that needed to be talked about. Despite not being the greatest or the most hyped #1 overall pick that we've ever seen, there is still some reason for fans, especially Hawks fans, to be excited surrounding Zaccharie Risacher. I don't know if he's going to have the all-NBA potential that we typically see of players in his draft spot, but I do think he has the potential of being a great role player to possibly a third or maybe even second option in the right scenario. I personally don't project him to be a all-star or star level player, but I've definitely been wrong on that before, and at the end of the day, he's 20 years old and he showed a ton of improvement in just 1 year of ball. To me, that is probably the most important thing, is to see how much he can get better once he's in the NBA. The fact that he got a lot better in a pretty short amount of time, that gives me promise that he can keep climbing, even if he wasn't a guy seen for having the highest ceiling coming into the NBA. I also feel a little bit of promise with Risacher because of his shooting. Typically, we don't see a lot of players be great shooters right out of college or right out of the EuroLeague, so the fact that Risacher was able to figure that out relatively quickly means that he can figure out other parts of his game. So in that regard, I actually do think he is ahead of schedule just because he had such a poor start to last year. While he himself may not be the most exciting player in the world, Zaccharie Risacher is one of the many reasons why the Hawks are one of the most intriguing teams, not just next year, but in the future. While the #1 overall pick may not be the star that you would typically see from someone drafted at that spot, Zaccharie Risacher might just make this Atlanta Hawks team an interesting one to watch. He's not Victor Wembanyama, he's not Cooper Flagg, but don't sleep on Zaccharie Risacher because he could very quietly become a key piece to a championship team. If you guys like this video, you know what to do, but that is it for this one, and I will catch you guys all next time.